Hey everybody, it's Atheist for the Cause here, and I've got an interesting article for you here about North Korea and China. So it says China responsibility theory on North Korea has to stop. Now what China responsibility theory is, it's this idea that North Korea effectively is controlled by China because they completely depend upon China. And North Korea's military is even dependent on China for, fuel, and they're even getting launchers and some missile parts from China. And because North Korea gets so much of their economy and so much of their military from China, the US should treat North Korea as a part of China. Therefore, if this is basically how the Cubans treated, or how the U.S. treated Russia during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And, Scott, I learned this from Scott Adams, so credit to him. But basically, instead of dealing with Cuba, we said, if Cuba ever nukes us, we're nuking you, Russia. And so, in China responsibility theory, we would say, if North Korea ever does anything, we're going after you, China. And we're going to blame you, China. And that puts the blame or the responsibility on China to prevent North Korea from ever doing anything. Because it would be them that would be targeted in retaliation. And this puts a lot of what I would call soft pressure on China. And it's a different type of pressure. It's not direct economic sanctions or anything like that. It's this constant, drive that China's going to feel to make sure nothing happens, this constant uneasiness. And it's a very, very effective method. So it says China hit back on Tuesday in unusually strong terms, repeated calls from the United States to put more pressure on North Korea, urging a halt to what is called the China responsibility theory, and saying all parties needed to pull their weight. I love how they say that all parties need to pull their weight, as if the U.S. isn't doing enough to pull our weight. I mean, the U.S. is doing... I would say we try harder than any other country in the world to prevent North Korea from getting a nuke. U.S. President Trump took a more conciliatory tone at a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Saturday, but he has expressed some impatience that China, with its close economic and diplomatic ties to Pyongyang, is not doing enough to rein in North Korea. And of course they're not. They don't really want to rein in North Korea. That's the truth. They could easily, pretty much overnight, if they wanted to, just by economic sanctions alone, say, we're not giving you... But they could easily say, we're not giving you military equipment anymore. We're not giving you fuel. That would be the big thing. No fuel, and they wouldn't be able to do anything militarily. And we're not going to... provide you economic, we're not going to buy from you economically, and we're not going to provide you products economically. And that would just cripple North Korea. They would have to give in within days. That feeling has become particularly acute since Pyongyang launched an intercontinental ballistic missile that some experts believe could have range to reach Alaska and parts of the U.S. West Coast. Asked about calls from the United States, Japan, and others for China to put more pressure on North Korea, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang said it was not China ratcheting up tension, and the key to a resolution did not lie with Beijing. Of course it's not China ratcheting up tension. You're the one trying to, keep the status quo. It's the U.S. who is trying to prevent this North Korea from becoming more nuclearized than it already is. China's trying to allow them to get there. They say they're not trying to, but then why aren't they doing more to stop it? Recently, certain people talking about the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue have been exaggerating and giving prominence to the so-called China responsibility theory. Gen told a daily news briefing without naming any parties. The fact that China themselves are responding to this is quite amazing, and it tells me that this is going to be the policy going forward. Because if I'm President Trump and I'm looking at, there aren't many options with North Korea left. And if this is the one that bothers China the most, this is the one I'm using, because this is the one they see as the biggest threat. And it's also the one that I see as one of the few reasonable solutions left without full-blown military assault. I think this either shows the lack of full correct knowledge of the issue, or there are ulterior motives for it, trying to shift responsibility, he added. China has been making unremitting efforts and has played a constructive role, but all parties have to meet each other halfway, Gen said. I mean, China has done more recently than in the past. They have, Trump has gotten them to give in on some things like buying U.S. coal and, denying North Korea coal. But in the end, they haven't gone nearly far enough. Most of what they've done has been symbolic gestures, not real solutions. Asking others to do work but doing nothing themselves is not okay, he added. Being stabbed in the back is really not okay. China, first of all, it's not stabbing you in the back to say that you're responsible for North Korea effectively when you have pretty much total control over them. We're not even allies. We're major powers largely in conflict with each other. So this makes no sense. The statement by China makes no sense. While China has been to say, but doing nothing themselves is not okay, to say that or imply that the U.S. is doing nothing in regards to North Korea, that's ridiculous, and the China responsibility theory would be doing something by putting the responsibility on you. That is doing something. While China has been angered by North Korea's repeated nuclear and missile tests, it also blames the United States and South Korea for worsening tension with their military exercises. What do you think the U.S. is gonna do? Of course the U.S. and South Korea are going to act out military exercises. We have to build our military and show that we're not accepting of these tests. To say that that's ratcheting things up is that's a bit of a stretch, China. China has been upset with the U.S. deployment of an advanced anti-missile system in South Korea, too, which it says threatens its own security and will do nothing to ease tensions. Well, then why don't you, use your power to control North Korea? Simple. And we won't need to put these anti-missile batteries in South Korea. But as long as the North Korean threat is there, you damn well better bet your ass that we're going to put these anti-ballistic missiles in South Korea. Then we're going to put them again in Japan. Then we're going to put them again in Guam and the Martian Islands and North Korea. I got a little carried away there. And Hawaii and Alaska and the mainland. And you know what? Maybe our missiles aren't they're not close to 100% at shooting these missiles down. But if North Korea launches some missiles at the United States, if we can launch from South Korea, we can launch from Japan, we can launch from our military, like submarines and carriers and cruisers, and we can launch from Guam and Hawaii and Alaska and the mainland. Likely we're going to be able to shoot those missiles down. So I don't really see this missile threat. It is a huge threat, and we can't accept it, and we have to deal with it. But at the same time, the chance that North Korea would ever be able to actually hit the United States with a nuke is so incredibly small. It really is. But it's still, if one ever did hit for whatever reason, it would be, it would hurt a lot. Just from a humanitarian standpoint, I mean, and an economic one as well. But, the U.S. could get nuked and still survive. People forget that, too. Say L.A. was nuked. Boom, take L.A. off the map. That's not going to do anything to Washington, D.C. That's not going to do anything to, 2/3 of the country is going to be completely fine. We're still going to have a lot of power. And then we're going to go destroy whoever nuked us. While China has been, then it says, China has been upset with the U.S. deployment. Additionally, Beijing has complained about Washington putting unilateral sanctions on Chinese companies and individuals for their dealings with North Korea. But so far, I'd add that those sanctions have been pretty light. We can do a lot more in terms of going after China. And they were mainly dealing with like very, very specific banks that deal with North Korea. And it's not really an attack on China as an entity where we could do sanctions and things that would attack China as an entity a lot better if we really wanted to. If we really wanted to deploy this. And you don't need to do sanctions or anything, but if we really wanted to put this China responsibility theory into motion and then try to justify, sanctions and stuff like that, we could go after China to a much greater extent. But again, the whole point of the China responsibility theory is that it's the threat that is the point. You don't actually have to do more than that. It's the threat of, North Korea doing something that China didn't foresee, and then China paying the consequences. So additionally, Beijing has complained about Washington putting unilateral sanctions on. Gensch questioned how China's efforts could bear fruit if, while it tried to put out the flames, others added oil to the fire, and if, while it enforced UN resolutions, others harmed its interests. Everyone needed to accept their responsibilities to get the North Korea issue back on the correct track of a peaceful resolution through talks, he added. This is the old status quo that didn't work. North Korea has never listened to talking. That is the exact wrong path. North Korea will not listen to talking. It's as simple as that. And China has to figure this out. And I completely agree with the China responsibility theory. I would be fine just with an all-out war, to be honest, but I understand that war is often the last option, and so that this is a non-military option that makes a lot of sense that I can get on board with. I can't get on board with economic sanctions. The U.S. does not have the power to cripple North Korea and then really make it hurt. Only China can do that. And we can't force China to do that. They're not doing that. And so we have to look at other methods. And so it says everyone needed to accept, and politically talking hasn't helped. So I don't see why that would help in the future. You have to try something new. Everyone needed to accept the responsibilities. The China responsibility theory on the peninsula nuclear issue can stop, Gensch said. Or it cannot. And why don't you take care of North Korea? Because it doesn't look like China has a good response. It really doesn't. It sounds like they're really worried about this and they don't have a good response. And therefore, those are some great reasons why we should actually employ the China responsibility theory. It worked with Cuba. I guess you could call it the Russia responsibility theory, where Cuba never nuked the United States because If they did, the United States would have destroyed Russia. Anyway, or I should say the Soviet Union. Anyways, this is very, very interesting stuff. And you should pay attention to this because this could be policy for the future. This could even be current policy and we don't even know it yet. But this is a non-military option for dealing with North Korea. And this gives some optimism to a very pessimistic looking situation. Have a good one, guys.